At this point, the tank project should be almost done. You've got your skybox, your landscape. We've gone over a lot of the modeling, the texturing, and the lighting. So you've got all the parts and pieces that you need to get this thing done. Now, when you're done, we're going to have to render it. The rendering is a single frame is what's needed, although you could render an animation, and I'll show you how to do that. But we need that single frame, and the frame itself is just an image. It doesn't need the max files, the texture files, or anything with it. It's just an image. But we'll also need the max scene, the max files, and all the textures so that I can open the file and take a look at how you built the tank. But we'll talk about the rendering. Here's my scene. As it's finally done, it's dark because I've got the lights turned down so they don't render here in my viewport. This could look however you want in order to render it. So just because it's in, say, wireframe mode isn't going to matter for the rendering. The rendering will take care of the entire scene the way that it's meant to be looked. So don't worry about what your viewports look for this. Your viewports could be in any configuration that you want, even bounding box. It's still going to render the same. I'm just going to put it back on smooth highlight so we have something to look at. Okay, I'm going to go up here under my render scene dialog. It's this button right here. And in the render scene dialog, we've got 5 tabs. The main one that we want to look at is this one under common. And we'll go through the main elements here of how to get this rendered. Up here at the top, you're telling Max what would you like to render. A single image is just one picture or the first frame or whatever frame this slider is on. It's usually on 0. Active time segment, if I highlight this, then I can put down over here, right in here, that will be from this number to that number of animation. So even though you might have more animation than 100 frames, if this says 100, this is only going to render 1 or 0 through 100. And then range, we could type in any number that we wanted, say frame 40 to frame 70, and it would render right here. We're going to leave it on single for this because I just want that single frame. You can also tell it which frames to render if you want more than one. And you can see the code here is a comma it means 1, 325, no, 1, 3, and then 5 to 12. So you can take a look at that and you can kind of see how you would tell it which frames you would want it to render. Okay, down here under output size, usually we want custom, although you get a ton of choices here. Under custom, you can type in what you want. It's locked on the image aspect ratio. If you want to lock this down, make sure this button's yellow. By default, it's off. So you can type in whatever you want here. I've got 640 by 480. Or you can hit these little preset buttons over here if you want one of these sizes. We want either 640 by 480 or bigger. So 800 by 600 would work too. Scrolling down, make sure these buttons here are checked to coincide with what you've put in your scene. Usually we want these first 3 checked. We certainly want displacement checked because we've used a lot of that. Effects we probably want checked because we've probably done some effects, and atmospherics. The rest of these probably can stay unchecked for what we've done in this class. And then we want to usually use advanced lighting. If you have a skylight in your scene, this is where you turn it off and on easily if you don't want to wait for it to render. So you can turn it off, do a quick render, and turn it back on for the skylight to take effect, but the regular lights will render anyways. And then this button here is probably one of the most important ones. We have to click this Files button to tell it where we want to save it. So once you click this, this will become active, or you can just check this box and it will save it to wherever it says it's saving here. So that's how you tell Max where to save the file. And then down here, scrolling down a little bit more, if you'd like to use a different renderer, you can go down here to assign renderer, and you do get some other choices here as far as which renderer you would like to use. I'm using the default scanline renderer in this class because we really didn't cover the different renderers, but if you want to play with them, they're down there. Okay, now we'll go over these other tabs really quick. Under renderer, this will change depending on which rendering option you've chosen at the bottom of the common elements. You can also turn off mapping and shadows here. You can turn off the reflect and refract here if you'd like to. Some people like to turn this off, render it, see what it looks like, and then turn it back on for the final one. Under anti-aliasing, if you'd like your, usually by default this is turned on, if you want your maps to look a little bit sharper, your texture maps that is, uncheck this and it won't filter your maps and you'll get a much sharper looking image. You can also turn off anti-aliasing, but you probably want to leave that one on, and that's the smoothing that goes on around the edges of your object. But filter maps is a good one to turn off since most of our maps have already been filtered once. Okay, I think the rest of that we can leave. Under advanced lighting, you've seen this tab before. This was the same one that we saw with the skylight. Remember this one? So this is where it was active, and we've unchecked this and checked this throughout the whole class. Your ray tracer options are here. There might be some things that you might like to change in here, although I tend to leave all these the same. And then under render elements, you can add any of these types of render elements if you'd like to, and you can play with these, although we really don't use these in this class. You can play with them, and that's where you would add them. Okay, so now to render this thing, we're going to go back to our renderer, common, sorry, and we're going to make sure that we're saving our file, and then we would hit render. At this point, anytime I hit this button, which is my quick render, it will use the same settings as here. Now, I'm thinking if I want to render this. I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and render this image, and then we'll wrap it up, and you'll be able to see the rendered image, and we'll show how to save from the rendered image itself. I'm going to turn off the video here for just a second and go ahead and render this, and we'll pick it back up. Okay, here we are with our image rendered, and there's just a couple things on this screen to go through. This is the rendered image, so this is no longer a max scene. You can hit this button here if you'd like to save it from this screen, but we already saved it over here in our render options. This button here will make a double of this if you'd like to work with it or to send it back into max as a composite. These are your color channels. Your alpha channel is right here if you'd like to use that in Photoshop to make it look a little bit nicer. And that's about it. I just wanted to show you those buttons from this screen. This is your final render. If you had an animation, you would get the similar buttons up here, except you wouldn't get a few of them. And your animation would be saved as an AVI, usually an AVI. But that's about it for rendering. We don't cover a whole lot of rendering in this class since it's mostly modeling. And that should get you pretty far.